Hi, Kim.
Hello.
Nice to finally kind of meet, so to speak, right?
It's lovely to be here.
My first question is, let's go all the way back to your beginning. Before you were involved with photography and films, where were you born and where were you raised?
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, during the biggest blizzard they ever had, and but I was mostly raised in Southern California. My
Wow.
folks were here when I was about 7, so I've been here for 50, 60 something years.
What got you into photography? Like, what was it you saw that got you involved with it? And I have to ask you this. When I think back to when I was a kid, I didn't have like a 35 millimeter camera. It wasn't so gettable as it is today with, digital and all this. So I remember like 110 cameras, the little square ones, they would come and they make that click loud sound. Now my uncles had 35 millimeter and they'd shoot a lot of slides. But how did you get involved with it?
Well, both of my parents enjoyed photography. My father had one of those giant uh, cameras that he used to shoot all of my baby pictures. And my mother used to shoot 35 millimeter slides. But she worked as a photographer's assistant before she got married. So she knew a lot about portraiture and about light. And she's the one who really taught me about light and how to when I'm photographing people, to look at the way the light is reflecting off their eyes and off their bone structure. It was hugely valuable throughout my career.
If you were from Southern California, how did you end up going to University of Berkeley?
Well, I spent my freshman year at Berkeley, and it was the year of the free speech movement. So the very first things I ever shot journalistically was the free speech movement, which I shot with my mother's camera that she gave me when I left for college. 1964, 1965.
Right, that's 64, 65. And if there was like 5,000 people that got active that day, is that correct?
It was incredible. I have photos of Joan Baez singing to the crowd, and how huge the crowd became. It was a very exciting experience, and I was interested in anything that had to do with film, but there was only one class at Berkeley that dealt with movies, and I
Okay.
took that class and loved it. And
You
then
love
I decided that I didn't really want to be a psychology major. I wasn't that interested in rat psychology. I transferred to UCLA to major in motion picture production.
Tell us about that day with the free speech movement. What exactly happened? And that was in the fall of 64, 65. That time frame?
Yeah, there had been a free speech area in front of the administration building where Telegraph and Bancroft Avenue meet. And it was a place where people could set up card tables and have political information and political buttons and things like that. In fact, I even had a table there once when Ronald Reagan first decided he was going to run for governor. I didn't think it was serious. And so I ran Robert Vaughn, the man from Uncle, for governor, and I had buttons printed up. I set my table up right next to the Reagan for governor people. And people would say, "Are you for real? Is this serious?" And I'd say, "I'm serious if they're serious." And I actually met Robert Vaughn when he played Hamlet. And I brought him one of the Robert Vaughn for governor buttons, and he was very touched.
Did that day have any effect on you or even the repercussions of that day politically as a person since that time? Like, did any of that carry into your life, the way you think? Like, did that affect you? Did that sink in at all, have an impact?
Well, I found it very inspiring. I mean, my family had always been very progressive. It was very inspirational to see students standing up for free speech, and they were successful. I mean, they managed to get the free speech area back, but it was quite dramatic when they took over the administration building and dropped the FSM free speech movement flags from the windows, and Joan Baez singing to the crowd, and it was all very inspirational.
Were there people arrested?
There was Jack Weinberger, who was in the car, the police car. Yes, he was arrested for passing out material about free speech and voting rights. But it all turned out well. It was just very dramatic at the
Oh,
time.
yes. Then you went from UC Berkeley down to UCLA, like you said, for film. What made that transition? Like, why did you switch schools and why did you kind of focus in and hone in on film production?
Well, I was very interested in movies. The one course that I had at Berkeley just whetted my appetite. And so I transferred down to UCLA to major in film production. My teacher in the film department was a legendary character named Bill Kirby, who was the first to wear shirts made out of American flags. He ran a light that was called the New Glory Light Show. And they did it for the local bands like the Doors, who came out of the film department at UCLA at that. And so he ran the light show at a floating club that was called the Kaleidoscope. It was at a different location every week. I would go along and help run the light show.
Wow.
And then he did his master's thesis film. He traveled to the Monterey Pop Festival and to the celebration of the summer solstice in Golden Gate Park. This was all the Summer of Love, 1967. And then we shot the police riot at Century City. It was a peace march that turned into a police riot, and we shot that. So the whole summer was kind of an awakening, very inspirational.
Now, is there any similarities to the upheaval then, socially, with the last few years, whether it be with Trump and Biden, COVID? Do you see any of that kind of civil unrest that's similar?
Well, we had a war to protest back in the 60s. Certainly with Trump, there was all kinds of corruption and unspeakable things to protest. And there's been so much progress just within my lifetime. I'm going to be turning 75 in February. Within my life, Roe v. Wade and women's rights and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, all of that it's all part of the spectrum of progress that we've made during the course of my life.
And in your opinion, and I'm not trying to be negative, or inclusion of computers and cell phones and laptops, all this social media and media itself being much more prevalent and accessible and a lot more of it. Do you find that, in your 75 years, has the world been getting better? Like, is it a better place to live, or is there something about that stuff that's making it worse?
Well, I'd say it's a mixed bag. There's an awful lot of misinformation that's being perpetrated, and that gets people upset and angry over untruths. And so that's actually jeopardizing their lives now with the anti-vaxxer movement. I mean, that's just the perpetration of ignorance.
Yeah.
But also the internet has provided such a fabulous resource for research. In the last couple of years, I've started writing novels, and to be able to research the late 15th century online has just been a joy, because so much now has been digitized that you would never have access to before. It's also, it's been a problem on movie sets, because it used to be that no one on the set was allowed to have a camera except the still photographer.
Right.
And now that everybody has a cell phone with a camera in it, inexperienced producers sometimes think they don't need a still photographer, which is a terrible mistake, because the still photographer is also the historian for the film. I mean,
Yeah.
beyond the production stills. And it also makes it very difficult for the actual official still photographer, because everybody's whipping out their cell phones, and the actors end up losing patience with being photographed, and it undermines the security of the set, because normally the stills generate the kind of interest they want, and there was no social media where anybody was just uploading things and potentially violating the security of the set. More difficult for still photographers now.
Technically, do you like the digital quality of digital photos today, or did you like the old fashioned, where you had to get film developed? In your opinion, which is better to you when you look at both?
Well, I love film because the film that I shot 40 years ago is still just as good today as it was then. The negatives are exactly the same. You can get beautiful images. I worry that people who are shooting digitally now won't be able to access them in 5 years. The means of storing digital material changes. Almost every year there's a new format or a new way that things are being preserved. And I can't even find the first pictures that I shot digitally. I don't know where they ended up.
Wow.
There's nothing tangible. I mean, I love the fact that you can see what you shot immediately. There were some things I shot, like working on Escape from New York, when Donald Pleasance was shooting a machine gun on the top of the bridge, and he was really far away, and it was at night, and there was no way to take a light reading. And I had to take my best guess to get that shot where he's shooting the machine gun. And I had to wait a couple of days to see if I got it or not.
Wow.
So excited when it turned out so well that you can even see the bullets flying off behind him, I'm concerned because people who shoot digitally have a tendency to shoot 100 pictures all at once of the same thing, rather than waiting for a decisive moment. And my shooting was always, because film was expensive, you couldn't just shoot, unlimited amounts of film. So I chose every single shot that I shot. I waited for the moments that were worth preserving. And so I worry about people shooting hundreds and hundreds of photos of the same thing, and then how do you sort through them and find the one that you think is the best, and what do you do with all of those? I mean, it just seems like a mess to me.
Yeah, it's kind of wasteful, right? When you went to UCLA, was
Yeah.
it for still photography interest, or you were thinking of cinematography, filming with cameras and such? Was that something in your head?
Oh, I would have loved to have been a camera operator for movies. I would have really loved that. But when I graduated, I didn't have any connections in the movie industry. And stills is something I had always done. And my teacher at film school, the legendary Bill Kirby, used to do interviews for the underground press, and he'd take me along to shoot the stills. And so I got to shoot Jimi Hendrix before he made his first appearance in LA at an interview. It's really funny. I was contacted many years ago by a company that was putting together a book that was called Classic Hendrix. And they were collecting the best pictures of Jimi Hendrix from all over the world for this book. And so they ran a couple of pages of my photos from that interview, and they asked for the story that went with it. So I directed them to Bill Kirby. And I didn't know what he said until I got the book in the mail. And he said, "Oh, I don't remember the interview." He said, "I only did interviews to get tickets to concerts." He said, "The one thing I remember is that Jimmy couldn't take his eyes off our still photographer, Kim. He thought she was so cute." And yes, and I'm saying, Jimi Hendrix was flirting with me, and I wasn't aware. And
Wow.
I showed that to my daughter when she was a teenager, and she said, "What? You mean you were a babe back then, Ma?"
That's a great story.
But that's
Was there anyone else at UCLA during the time you were in that film production course that ended up becoming someone within the film industry?
I'm sure there were, but it wasn't really until I started working with John Carpenter that I started coming in contact with other people who were involved with making movies.
Yeah.
And a lot of them had come from USC. A lot of people would visit the campus, to make speeches and stuff. And so I started doing journalistic photography there, and I shot people like Shirley Chisholm, the first black congresswoman, and Dr. Spock, and I started working for the underground press after I graduated, and I got to photograph Andy Warhol. I have a rare picture that it took me a long time to get of Andy Warhol smiling. During the entire interview, I sat there with the camera up to my face waiting for any change of expression. And one of his companions said something that amused him, and I got the shot of Andy Warhol smiling.
What was the movie that you worked on that Deborah Hill, the late Deborah Hill, was a script supervisor on that I believe never got released before you guys worked with John Carpenter? What was that film, and when was that?
Well, it had a couple of names. As I said, it was never released, but it was called Swingin' on a Star or The Good Time Band. It starred Lane Caudell, Deborah Raffin, and Wolfman Jack. It was really an awful movie, and it was never released. But Deborah Hill was the script supervisor on it, and she really appreciated a lot of the crew members, particularly the camera crew. And so when she knew she was doing Halloween with John, she called us and to find out if we'd like to work on the film.
So I have to ask this because Halloween changed my life. I mean, I'm not saying that as a casual fan,
It
but
changed me.
I'm a film director. I've been making movies 30 years, and it was because of that movie when I saw it, it impacted me so much. Again, this is not from a media point of view. This is for me as a 13-year-old boy, 1978, scared the crap out of me. I couldn't shake the movie from my head. Those images of Michael Myers behind Jamie Lee at the clothesline on the street, behind Annie, all these people, that just really got to me. And I didn't know it was directing at first. But what it did do is it made me want to get involved with film. And I didn't know what or how. 4 years later, I saw The Thing, which was the same director. Now, when I went to see the movie, I didn't actually connect it was the same guy. At that point, I wasn't as knowledgeable about all the filmmakers as I am since. But to make a long story short, I walked out, looked at the poster after I saw the movie, and I was like, wait a second, that's the same guy that made Halloween. And it was at that very second I said, I want to do what he did to me twice. So John Carpenter is the reason I become a filmmaker, and I've made many films since then, etc. So So my question is, holding that movie in such high regard for me, so special to me, where were you at when you got the call? Because that was before cell phones, it's before the internet, obviously. Tell me about the situation and when it came in, and then what was your reaction? What did she say to you?
She said, Kim, I'm working with this young director, John Carpenter, and we're going to be making a low-budget horror film. It's going to be about a 5-week shooting schedule. We don't have a lot of money. I think I made $150 a week or something. And she said, would you like to work on it? And I said, sure. None of us thought it was going to end up being one of the most profitable movies of all time compared to its investment, because it was made for $300,000.
So after you got that call, what was your expectation before you got on set? Like, were you just thinking this is just another job? Or was this, okay, I studied film production, I'm going to be on a movie. Like, what were you thinking? Because, none of us can be in that spot that you were in back then. And of course, John Carpenter wasn't who he is. Jamie Lee Curtis wasn't who she became. So what was your expectation before you stepped a foot on the set?
I didn't really have any expectations. I had gone with Deborah before, so I knew pretty much how a set was run. But working with John was really unique because, first of all, he has such a clear vision of what he wants. Everything is storyboarded. He knows how it goes shot by shot and exactly how it will cut together. And he communicates to the crew exactly what they need to do so that he can get the shot that he needs. Deborah had a knack for choosing crew members who were good-natured and good-humored as well as being good at what they do. And so being on set was just a pleasure, No one ever raised their voice. Everything went really smoothly. We never had over a 12-hour day, ever. It was just a beautiful experience. It was like working on a high school project with all of your best friends, because everybody was so helpful to each other and cooperative. And I didn't even have blimps for my cameras then. It was really the first, major film I had worked on, and I didn't know I needed blimps. My camera's silent. So whenever there was a scene that was very quiet, I couldn't really click during the scene, or the sound man would pick the sound of my camera. Occasionally there would be something that would be so visually important that I would say, at the end of the scene, I would say, John, let me have this one. And he'd say, okay. And when they were done getting it, he would say, okay, now do it again for Kim. Never find a director who will do that. It was just such a pleasure. There was one scene in particular where Nancy Steffens, who plays Annie, was killed in the car. You remember, inside the car.
Yes.
And the only angle you can get that is through the window of the car. And that's where the camera was, the movie camera. So there was no way to get that shot while they were doing it. So I said, oh, be sure to let me have this one, John. And he said, okay. So when they were done, he pulled the camera out and he said, okay, to the people inside the car, let's do it again for Kim. And I got to go in the window and direct them so that I could get the exact angles that I needed, so the knife would reflect a little bit and I'd get the shot that I wanted.
When you were filming it, Dean Cundey teach you anything in photography? Like, did you pick up any tips from him? Because I think he's one of the greatest cinematographers in the history of film. And I know at that time he wasn't as well known as he became. But I mean, go on to Jurassic Park and Roger Rabbit, and I mean the list goes on and on and on. And I truly think there's something about the work he did with John Carpenter that is really, really distinct, and it really stands out. Whether it be The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, they had a communication between the two of them that is pretty much, in my book, unmatched. I mean, just incredible. What was it like working with Dean? And tell me about him, because I think he's amazing.
Oh, Dean Cundey is a lovely person. He is very sweet, very soft-spoken, has a very dry sense of humor. He's just a sweetheart. And he worked as a team with Ray Stella, who was his camera operator, and Clyde Bryan, who was their first assistant. Of course, he knew what John wanted because John had storyboarded everything. The communication was very clear. And I know that Dean learned a tremendous amount by working with John. And then it was John and Deborah who got Dean and Ray and me, the whole camera crew, into the union when we did Escape from New York, because that was the big step into really being professional. You know, before that it was indie movies, you know, off the cuff. After that it became professional. And the way she did it was really unique because there was a catch-22, worked 30 days on a union film. But you couldn't work on a union film if you weren't in the union. So it seemed like it was impossible to get into the union. But Deborah figured it out. And she signed contracts with me and with Dean and with Ray and with all the people on the crew who she wanted to use on Escape from New York to do that movie before she signed her union contracts. And when she signed her union contracts, they couldn't make her void previously signed contracts. They had to honor the contracts she already had in effect. So they had to let us work on the film. And once we got 30 days, we could get into the union. Now, I had one small problem, and that was that we had 1 day left to shoot for me to get the 30 days. That last day of shooting was going to be on a Monday, and we held the wrap party on the Saturday before, so we had held the wrap party a little bit early. And it was held at a roller skating rink. And I was doing all right. I was skating around the rink, you know, slowly and carefully, but I was doing all right. People in the rink who were not part of the camera crew. And they heard that there was a movie crew there, and so they wanted to show off. And one fellow who had to be at least 6'4" and 300 pounds went spinning across the rink and slammed into me from behind. And I went flying through the air and came down on my wrist and broke all 3 bones in my wrist.
Oh my God.
And this was on Saturday night when I had to shoot one more day on Monday in order to get my 30 days. And Deborah took me to the hospital. They weren't going to treat me because I didn't have my purse with me with credit cards and IDs and stuff, so they weren't going to treat me. And my wrist looked like an S. And Deborah took out her credit card and she said, "You take care of her." And she stayed with me in that dark hospital at night, all night, while they set my wrist. And I'm convinced that that's what gave her the idea to set Halloween 2 in a hospital at night.
Yeah, I know we're kind of jumping around and that's okay, but you know, tell us a little bit about Deborah besides this great story. I don't think she ever gets the credit that John does, maybe even Dean, because she's no longer with us, you know. Talk about her personality. I know you worked with her obviously multiple times, and I just think she's an unsung hero. She not only produced those movies, but she wrote Halloween with John. She wrote The Fog with him. You know, she was a big part of those films.
Deborah was a dynamo. She was barely 5 feet tall, if that.
Really?
And she was, her energy, her ability to organize things, her ability to make sure that every single person on the crew had what they needed to do their jobs, so that nobody had to worry about that. Everybody could just focus on the film because everything else was taken care of. She was so good at it. She really shattered the glass ceiling when it came to women producers. She was amazing. And
was she a girly girl? Was she like, would you call her more of a feminine type of a woman or more of a tough woman?
She was tough, but she was adorable.
Wow, that's an interesting.
She was beautiful. She was a great dancer. When we were on location on The Fog, you know, sometimes in the evenings, all the girls would get together in one of the Winnebagas and just incredible at getting things done. She and John were a fabulous team.
When you first started working with them, they were dating, right?
They were actually living together, yeah. The wrap party
Now,
for Halloween was held at their apartment.
so my question is, obviously that changed when you made the next movie, The Fog. Adrienne Barbeau was in that, and I know John eventually had a relationship with her. So did you notice a difference after that movie? Did they still work together nicely, even though they weren't together romantically?
They worked together seamlessly, always. And John's relationship with Adrienne had no impact that I could see at all on their relationship working on films together.
That's great. That shows them very professional. Before we jump to The Fog, I just wanted to ask you, how would you best describe in a few words John Carpenter?
Well, he's become kind of a curmudgeon in his old age. But he was always good-humored, always really focused, always knew exactly what he needed to do, never raised his voice, never had to. He appreciated every single member of his crew because he knew every single person was contributing to his vision. And he appreciated every single one of us. There was no pecking order. you know? I mean, everyone was an equal. You know, I've worked on films where the director wouldn't even speak to someone who wasn't a department head.
Wow.
And that was not John. John really appreciated his crews.
How would you describe Jamie Lee Curtis?
Well, I know Jamie was very insecure the first couple of days on the shoot because this was her first starring role. On the first day or two, it seemed to me, I mean, and this, I might be wrong, but this was my perception that she seemed to be avoiding my camera a little bit.
Oh,
And it occurred to me that because she grew up in such a high-profile family, that maybe she was used to avoiding still photographers.
yeah, tabloid, right?
So I left my portfolio in her Winnebago. So you could see all my rock and roll stuff and the stuff that I shot in Pakistan and just the whole variety of stuff I'd already done. And the next day, man, she was there, ready. If the light was good on the side of the set, she would fake a scream for me or pose. It was just the best working relationship. She is the sweetest person. She is just a wonderful lady. To this day, she is still a wonderful lady. When my John Carpenter book came out, she was making an appearance. I can't remember whether it was at I think it was at the Egyptian Theater. I met her backstage beforehand and gave her a copy of the book, and she was so thrilled with it when she got on stage. She held it up and she said, "And this is a brand new book that our still photographer Kim Gottlieb Walker made, and it's terrific." So you can't ask for better publicity than that.
Donald Pleasance.
What a joy. I mean, working with pros is such a pleasure. Sometimes you get, kids who are new to stardom and can be a little bit prima donna or be self-conscious about a still camera. Donald Pleasance was totally cooperative at all times. He was just a joy to work with, a real pro.
Nick Castle as Michael Myers.
And Nick is such a sweet, funny guy. I mean, it's impossible to be scared of the shape when you know what's inside the costume. There was one time when Dr. Pepper gave us a whole lot of cases of Dr. Pepper just for the crew to use, and the only thing they asked was to have a few still photographs of people on the set making use of it.
Think of it.
I went around handing Dr. Pepper cans to the whole cast and taking, and there's the picture that I particularly love of Nick with the shape mask on his head.
When you saw the Michael Myers mask the first time, and I'm not sure when you saw that on the shoot, but what was your reaction to the mask? Like, did it make you feel any kind of sensation one way or the other?
Nothing on set was scary. I mean, the scariness is in John's technique in shooting and cutting the film.
And his music.
But working on a horror film is not scary at all.
What would you say what's your favorite memory of Halloween? I say that because I'm a director, obviously now, and sometimes I have these moments of my movies where they may not be even something you end up seeing in the film that are really special. One, for example, but there's a movie I made called The Downfall of Johnny Garrett, and it's part of a feature film called Gruesome, Threesome, which I put out about a year ago. But the movie is actually made in 1996. There's a scene where a girl gets attacked by this guy. It's actually a rape scene. And we didn't really show too much of it to make it watchable. I remember going to the actress and saying, "What do you need?" And she asked me all these questions and such. When I went to him, I said, "What do you need from me to know to play the scene?" And he said, "Nothing." And he was good to go. And just that confidence and that quietness was something that was really special for me. How about you? What about for Halloween? It may not even have been something seen in the movie that's your favorite memory from the shoot.
Oh gosh, every day had favorite memories. I think before it even started, they did wardrobe tests with the three girls, and I took them out onto the steps of the wardrobe trailer and just shot pictures of the three of them together. And it was kind of a chance for them to bond as girlfriends, and for me to get really nice portraits of the three of them. That was kind of a nice way to start off the shoot.
What camera did you use on Halloween?
Nikon F2.
Wow, okay.
No, wait, I think that was even before I had the Nikon F2, so it might have been my Pentax. I think by the time I did the fog, I had the Nikon F2 and blimps for it.
And did you have a preference in what type of film?
Mostly Tri-X.
Okay, wow.
And most of the time, because we were shooting a lot of nights, it would be pushed to 1200 or 2400 so that I could deal with the low light levels.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
In terms of color film, I couldn't really afford Kodak films, so I used RGB. It's Eastman Color Negative. It's actually movie film. It's 35 millimeter movie film that they roll into rolls, so you get 36 shots. But it's meant for projection. It's not really meant for print. But
Right.
it was cheap, so I could shoot.
So The Fog, which in my opinion is kind of an underrated masterpiece. I don't, even though I know they've remade it, which was terrible. I don't hear a lot of people talk about it as much as obviously Michael Myers, Halloween, etc. I just think it's a masterpiece of suspense and like cinematic atmosphere. When you guys went from doing Halloween, which I guess at that point had become very successful by the time you did The Fog, did you have that core crew? Did you guys have a confidence that the next one was going to be the same? How was that follow up to Halloween?
As part of John's crew, we already knew how to work with each other. So that was easy. That came easy. And it was fun being on location because before we had just lived at home and we'd show up on the set each day. So to actually be on location was exciting. We were in the second foggiest place in the United States. One thing that I hadn't anticipated was the way fog works. It's not that easy to shoot in fog. And there were some locations that were fairly small rooms that they would then pump the fog in, and fog starts at the bottom and it works its way up. And sometimes I would be directly under the movie camera to get the same shot that they were getting, and so the fog would cover me up before it got to the movie camera.
You know, I went up to Point Reyes, my wife and I, when we got married. We decided to go on our honeymoon to California because, believe it or not, I'd never been to Southern California at that point, which was 1997, April of 97. So what we did was we started up in San Francisco. Her sister lived across the bay. So we went, we're in that area where part of her family was. And then we just went up a little bit to Santa Rosa and kind of went down the coast over 2 weeks. Like, how many times is anyone life? Can you take 2 weeks to go look at someplace? So we saw all of California over 2 weeks because we had friends in LA, friends in San Diego, and so we were each place maybe 4 or 5 days. My wife didn't know all of this, but I knew. I'm photographic memory almost of locations where movies were shot. I used to take a notebook and a pen in the movie theater, and VHS especially, I'd write down where films are shot. So I knew it was shot in Point Reyes, and I'd never been there. And for my guesstimation, I don't think I'd ever get another chance to be there. We went up through Bodega Bay, where Hitchcock shot The Birds, and came down around that bay up into Point Reyes and what's it called, Iverness. As we're driving up towards the lighthouse, and I noticed the house with the stilts on the water there. I noticed that. My eyes, very, very photographic memory as a filmmaker. But as we're going up, the sign said closed on Wednesday, and it was a Wednesday.
Oh,
And I'm like, there's no way I'm not going to go see that lighthouse. So we made the trip it's a pretty long drive, as you know, all the way out to the end of it. We get over there, and there's a big fence. And I think about it now, I was a little crazy. But I told my wife, remember, we just got married. I said, you stay here. She couldn't climb that fence. I said, I will climb it. Hand me the VHS at the time, video camera under the fence, and I'll go film the lighthouse. This was probably like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was kind of sunny. The one thing I remember about it, I'm sure you can verify this, that place where the White House, the lighthouse is, that's like the windiest place I've ever been to. All the trees were sideways like this. All the grass was sideways. And when I was walking out to the road that goes out to the lighthouse, I noticed that perspective of the bay from the hill that you saw in the opening credit. That's right there. I noticed it. When I got out there, I saw there was another fence to the lighthouse. And of course, what most people don't understand is the lighthouse is down. It's down at the bottom of the steps. It's not up here. And I decided not to go down all those steps. I just filmed it from up the top. And I remember seeing those signs that say you could see whales, sometimes migrate. I didn't see any, but it was very beautiful, but very windy. And my wife told me in the little outhouse that was outside the fence, which she used, she said she felt like in Wizard of Oz, it was going to pick up and get taken by a tornado. So talk about Point Reyes.
I really only remember the things I photographed.
Wow.
I don't have a great memory. It's one of the reasons I'm a photographer. It substitutes for my memory.
Do
So
now, do you ever have to sometimes just take the camera and say, let me look with my eyes and not just always through the viewfinder? Do you ever have to do that? Like just to enjoy it?
No, usually it's all just through the camera. And when I'm shooting, I don't hear a lot. All my senses go into my eyes, you know.
Wow.
So during all the time that I was shooting rock and roll, I attended an awful lot of great concerts that I didn't hear.
I know that Carpenter had to do some reshoots on The Fog. After he cut the film, he felt like it didn't work. Did you go back for that part of it or just the initial principal photography?
I was just there for the principal photography.
Okay, got it.
And the same with Escape from New York, because they did do a pickup shot or two in New York, you know, like near the Statue of Liberty and stuff like that. But I only shot when they were in LA.
Did you have any interaction with Rob Bottin on The Fog, the guy that was a special makeup effects artist that played Blake with the red eyes and the big tall guy with the sword? Did you have any interaction with him? Because in my opinion, he's one of the greatest special effects makeup artists of all time.
Yeah, no, just photographing him.
You had to travel out Midwest for Escape from New York because that was shot in St. Louis. Am I right?
I was not allowed to go because it was a union film, and because in those days the Camera Guild was separated into three separate locals. There was one that was the West Coast, the 13 Western states. There was one that was New York and the East Coast. And there was one that was the center of the country, including Chicago. The rules were you could shoot there, but you had to use a crew that was from that region. And if you brought your own people, you still had to hire people from that region and just have them stand by, but they had to make the salary. Rather than pay double for the entire crew, they took the key people that they had to take and paid for the standbys for them. But for me, they said, look, we'll still have 30 days after we get back, so we're still going to get you into the union. But while we're in St. Louis, we will use the photographer that the union gives us from that region while we're there. And then when we come back into town, you'll finish and you'll get the rest of your days. So I was kind of disappointed because that 2 weeks in St. Louis, I knew they had a great time and all kinds of adventures that I missed out on. And when they came back and I came onto the set, everybody was making these really sympathetic noises at me and I couldn't figure out why. And it turned out that the union chose to interpret the fact that Deborah hadn't taken me to St. Louis and paid for a standby to mean that she had fired me. And therefore, since I wasn't in the union yet, she could not hire me to finish the shoot. I know, it was insane. And Deborah said, I'm not going to let them get away with this. I know I didn't fire you. I know I was just obeying the union rules. So you keep working. It may take a couple of weeks for this to be worked out, but you keep working. And I'm not going to pay you under the table because it has to be official through the payroll company for it to count for your union days. So you keep coming to work and let me handle this. There was an arbitration. She argued, I think it was a 5-hour arbitration where she fought for me. And she proved that she had not fired me, that she was just following the union rules and that I should be allowed to finish the shoot. And she won. And she came on the set with bottles of champagne. And we all celebrated. And I got into the union. I shot on Monday with my arm in a cast. You know, on pain pills with my arm in a cast, balancing my camera on my shoulder. People saying, oh, we don't really need this shot. And I kept saying, yes, we do. And I will get it. It was where there's a helicopter and a raft with people escaping on a raft with the helicopter up above it. I got the shot, even though I was somewhat impaired.
Okay. That says a lot about Deborah.
Oh, she would always fight for her people. Gave me my career.
What was Kurt Russell like?
Kurt was great. He liked to pretend that he was right wing, and so that he'd say things like "nuke the whales," but I didn't buy it for a second. Just really good-natured guy. He loved playing Snake Plissken. It was a real breakout performance for him to get away from all of the childhood roles that he had done for Disney.
And of course, John and him had done that TV movie about Elvis.
So he and John were really close, and he had a great time on the shoot.
In terms of the core crew, now that you had done kind of like a third film together, Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, was everybody kind of in that same oiled up, just like you guys were a machine? Or did you start to see any of the things become a little difficult? And I'm not saying I know that. I'm just curious, like, was that team just clicking? Or was it, did some, like, I say that because you see like an NFL football team and they do really well and go to playoffs, maybe win a Super Bowl. And then sometimes some of the guys want more money. they think they're a big star and they want to move on. Did you start to see any of that over that three picture?
No, we were a great team.
Well, I will say this. I think that when John's team started to change, for whatever reason, whether it was a studio insisting it or him or someone outside of him, the movies didn't quite have the same quality. There was something about that nucleus. I think the same I'd say about George Romero. When you look at George Romero's films like Martin and Dawn of the Dead and movies like Creepshow, and then he changed his team for whatever reason, you sometimes lose that spark.
Well, it's interesting because on Halloween 2, it was the whole same crew from Halloween in the Fog, but there was a different director.
Yeah.
And the director sets the tone. I think it was because it was his first feature and he was feeling a little insecure. I don't think he fully trusted the crew. And he could. He could trust the crew. I mean, it was John's crew. We knew what we were doing. We were good at what we did. I kept getting thrown off the set because I don't think he understood what the purpose of the still photographer was. There's an adjustment process that happens before each shot where Ray would look through the camera lens and say, okay, I'm catching your reflection in the glass, so move about 6 inches to your right and we'll be fine. That was the normal adjustment process.
Yeah.
But if anybody mentioned my name, he would just kick me off the set.
Because he didn't understand, because he was inexperienced.
I don't think he really understood what the purpose of the stills was and how important they would be to promoting the film. I did the best I could because John and Deborah were producing and I loved them dearly and I wanted it to be successful and I did the best I could. It wasn't as much fun.
It's interesting that you say all those things because one thing I feel about Halloween 2 is though it's not as good as the first one, without question, you can still see there's a continuance of a quality that you saw in the first movie. The cinematography, obviously John and I think Alan Hawthorne did the music, which kind of carries over from the first one. Even though I know Alan didn't work on the first film, there still was a quality to the movie itself. Maybe not the directing. It lacked a little bit of suspense because it focused a little more on gore. But I think that might also have been the script because I think John and Deborah were trying to make it more like a Friday the 13th or something like that was hot at the time. So they might have been trying to kind of match those other movies at the time, My Bloody Valentine, etc. Yeah, there is a quality to it that you can still feel it.
Well, it was still all John's crew. And then when we worked on Christine, I was pregnant with my second son during the shooting of Christine, and my belly was like community property. There were a lot of things like explosions, and it was amazing. The crew would build little barriers to make sure that I was protected when I was shooting explosions. When we blew up the gas station, I was on a 20-foot ladder because there was an angle that I wanted to get of that blow up, spotting me from below to make sure that I wasn't gonna, get blown off the ladder.
That's a baby.
And cars kept driving off the road. They didn't realize that we had made that gas station in order to blow it up. And there were cars pulling off the road in order to get gas, not realizing that it was just a set.
Deborah didn't produce that movie. Was that John bringing you onto that?
Yeah.
Because he had a different DP. It was a different crew.
Yeah, Don Morgan was also a gem.
Yeah, and he had worked with John on Elvis, right?
I believe so.
So you liked working with him as well?
Absolutely.
So Christine, I really love that film. I saw it in the theater when it came out. I think it's got some of the best acting of a horror film I've ever seen. And I'm not surprised that there's 2 directors that came out of that cast.
Gordon
both John Stockwell and Keith Gordon.
Wow.
And to be honest with you, a couple years ago, about the last 5 years, I've moderated what I call the Masters Tribute Roundtable. And I get together with other directors and film historians, and we talk I choose a director to honor all the people involved, then talk about the director. And we have the same 7 questions for every roundtable. John was our second year. First year was George Romero and Tobe Hooper. We did 2 because they both had died. Then we did Carpenter, then we did Wes Craven. Last year we did David Cronenberg. I'm about to release this Sunday Brian De Palma. Going back to Christine, one of the questions that we always ask is, what is the best acting performance, in this case, in a John Carpenter movie ever? So everyone chooses something different. There's a lot to choose from, right? And I chose something kind of unorthodox. Instead of taking a lead character, I chose William Ostrander to play Buddy Repperton in Christine. I thought he was so tangibly scary. There was a threat about him, and he seemed like the real thing. And I never forgot his performance, and I was always wondering why I didn't really see him in a lot of other movies. Flash forward, Bill is going to be in my next movie. He's playing a police captain in my next film. He found out about what I had said about him, pretty thrilled about that. And we talk on the phone and text and everything else. And he's going to be playing a very important role in my next film that I would compare to the Robert Shaw's character in Jaws, where he played Quint. Someone that's going to take my movie that's a supernatural ghost story, and he's going to ground it in the realism of a chief of police. He's not the main character, but he's one of the most important characters. I think it's going to be a great role for him, and it's going to be an honor for me to work with someone that was on Christine. So what was it like working with Bill, Keith Gordon, John Stockwell, Robert Prosky, all those guys?
They were all lovely to work with. Keith Gordon never went to a Winnebago or anything in between scenes. He always stayed near John and near the camera, and that's how he learned how to direct. That was his schoolroom.
And he had worked with De Palma already on Dress to Kill and Home Movie, so he's learning from De Palma and John Carpenter. I mean, holy crap.
And I remember with Bill, it was really fun. They had all of these, the tough schoolboys, and I got them all together for a group picture so they could pose as a bunch of tough guys, and that was really fun.
Bill is highly intelligent, very deep. Know if a lot of people know that, because if they haven't seen him in movies he told me that 20 years ago or so, he just got a little bit unfulfilled with Hollywood and decided he wanted to do other things. Just a great guy, really grounded. I like him a lot. And it's gonna be. What about Robert Prosky? Because he came across so with all that language and the cigars, and he came across as this crusty old nasty guy. I'm sure he was probably the opposite, right?
Oh yeah, all of the old pros, are just a pleasure to work with. They all know their lines. They're there on time. They're totally cooperative. They're good-natured. And that was true for all of working with John, because picking both the crew and the cast, it was more than just their talent. It was also their good nature.
I try to do the same, because I'd rather work with someone that had, that was friendly and passionate and didn't have an attitude. It's so much easier. I don't know about you, but I have a problem working with the kids in their 20s. They don't have the same work ethic. They're always on their phones. They're distracted. And that's why if you look at my next movie, Bill's like, 61, I guess. Ron Keel's 60. All my people are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, because that's who I like to work with. I don't have to, try to force these people to get into doing their jobs. So before we go out, I've got to ask you about your book. And I know that you have other books and you have other things you've shot, etc. But I was kind of focused on. I don't know if you remember, but I remember reaching out to you before you had made the book and just said, if you ever make a book, I would love to review it. And that might have been 3 years, 4 years before you actually did it. How long was the process that you were thinking about putting together that book?
I think it took about a year to put it together. I had pitched it to Titan Books, and they had done my Bob Marley book first, which was kind of out of their wheelhouse, because Titan specializes in science fiction and fantasy. But they knew that Bob Marley had a big enough following around the world that it was worth taking a chance. And they said, well, upload a few pictures and we'll see what we're working with. So I uploaded about 300 pictures, and they said, oh, okay, let's do this. And and they gave me an editor, and they gave me an art director, and we put it together, and I rewrote my contract so I had artistic approval, and we put together the book I wanted to do. And then I decided it was time to put together the John Carpenter book, and that was in their wheelhouse. So they said, okay, let's do it. And they gave me the same editor and the same art director. And because I had artistic approval, they would send me the layouts, and I would say, all right, let's move this picture to the next page and make that one bigger, and let's add this. In fact, on the day it went to press, I discovered a bunch of portraits I had done of PJ Souls, and I said, oh, we've got to put one of these in there. And so at the last minute, they put in one of the portraits I did of PJ. So it was wonderful working with Titan, and I was very happy with the way the book turned out.
Did John ever see the book?
Oh, yes. He wrote the introduction for it, too.
Deborah couldn't have seen it because it came out after she was gone.
Yeah, and I dedicated the book to her. So there's a portrait of her right in the beginning.
Yeah, I loved it. I had expectations of what I hoped it would be like. And after, I got it to review, from you, I thought it was more than I could ever hope for. It was so much that a guy like me that's a Carpenter fanatic that was directly inspired to become a filmmaker, it was like, I couldn't read it too fast. I wanted to take my time because there was so much to look at and to think about and to imagine and see. I think you did a beautiful job. I tell everyone about that. Anytime I review another Carpenter book that might come out, and there's been a couple since then, not photo ones like yours, I will always reference your book.
Well, I think the book reflects the joy that we all experienced in working with John.
Even that cover, you have like a casual friendliness to what John's talking to her with the camera there, yet you see it's professional. It's a movie, but there's a certain calmness to it, instead of seeing all these huffy puffy studgy guys in suits trying to act like they're movie people. It's like reality.
Well, I also trained both John and Dean Cundy that if nothing was going on and I was standing there with my camera, that if they would point, it would give me a picture.
There you go.
So I had them very well trained, and one of my favorite pictures is from Escape from New York, where they're sitting on the dolly on opposite sides of the camera. And they saw me standing there with the camera, so they both pointed spontaneously in opposite directions.
That's unbelievable.
My favorite picture of me is from Escape from New York.
Oh, is it really?
Where we're playing with the props. Just for your information, I wrote a novel loosely based on my career. I turned it into a romance novel to make it more fun both to write and because my career is so varied, it was a way to tie everything together. And it's called Lensed Woman, and I actually have an agent for it who's about to pitch it to publishers. So I will keep you informed because it's a very entertaining novel.
I would love to read it. So all I can say is that I really appreciate you taking the time tonight to talk to me and be on this show. I think I can speak for film fans and John Carpenter fans, and I know your other photos you've done, but for the film world, the history you created photographically has not only been a joy, it's been very important that you documented it, and you have such great eye for that. I can't thank you enough for this huge contribution to the history of movies and John Carpenter's films in particular.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think it's really important for still photographers who are working in the business to remember that they are the set historian, that it's more than just the publicity and promotion, that they're the historian preserving how the film was made. And it's a very important role, and I hope producers realize that and always have a still photographer, a dedicated still photographer on their set, both for the production stills, for the history behind it, and for the crew picture at the end, so that everyone has something to remember it by.
Yeah, thank you. And I would just add, as a director, those stills photos, and they may not even be scenes from movie, become some of my most prized possessions when I can look back to a production. Looking back when I was in the Army and I started as a filmmaker making films in the military, not for the Army, but for myself. And I see when I was 20 years old, didn't know a thing about what I was doing, but those moments are captured forever and you can never get those moments back. So that's key. And it says so much about your importance to the film world and obviously music and other things you've been involved with.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Once Deborah got me into the union, I was able to work on other things. Like I worked on Cheers for 9 years. I worked on Family Ties for 5 years. I worked on the pilots for Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Next Generation. I just had a wonderful career, and it was all thanks to Deborah.
God rest her soul in heaven and all that. She was wonderful, and I'm definitely someone who appreciates what she did for you and for movies. So have a great night and be safe.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Bye, Kevin.